Today I'm going to tell you a story so haunting that it lingers long after the dust settles set in the lonely heart of the Old West, where the wind carries the scent of sage and gunpowder. A place where survival was never guaranteed and where fate often crossed paths with violence. It began with something small, a rider appearing on a quiet ranch road. But by the time the sun set the next day, an entire basin would be stained with blood. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun hung low over Bitter Creek Basin, bleeding copper across the dry flats. Dust devils spun lazy along the parched grass, carrying the faint bite of sage and horse sweat. Nora Kane stood in the corral, one hand steady on the lead rope of the young Mustang colt she'd been gentling for weeks. The animal's ears flicked forward, then back uneasy. She felt it too. The air had gone still in a way that wasn't natural. Scout lay at her feet, gray muzzle resting on paws, but his ears were up body tense. The creek murmured behind the cabin, soft and steady, the only sound that still felt like home. Up the gentle rise, the single oak stood dark against the sky. Caleb's headstone, small and plain at its base. 3 years since the fever took him. 3 years of silence she'd learned to live inside. Nora kept her eyes on the colt, kept her voice low. Easy, boy. But her free hand drifted toward the worn leather of the colt belt, riding low on her hips. The twin peacemakers hung heavy familiar like old regrets she'd never quite shaken. Scout growled once low in his throat, not the sharp yaps he saved for coyotes or jackrabbits. This was deeper rolling thunder from his chest, the kind he only gave when something meant real harm. Nora's stomach tightened. She glanced toward the cabin. The Winchester still rested in its pegs above the doorframe, oiled and ready. Beyond it, the oak and the grave waited. Another sound now. Hooves. Not one horse, not two. A steady rhythm, deliberate. Dust rose in a thin yellow veil along the trail from the east. She let the lead rope slip through her fingers. The colt sidestepped, nostrils wide. She didn't chase him. Instead, she turned slow toward the approaching riders. 7 of them. They came at an easy lope, spreading out as they neared Fanning into a loose half-circle about 30 yards from the porch. Good horses, well fed. Good saddles. Men who knew how to sit a mount and how to kill from one. The leader rode a cold black stallion that shone like wet obsidian. He wore black from hat to boots, silver spurs catching the last light. 2 ivory-handled colts rode high in cross-draw holsters. His face was lean, clean-shaven except for a thin mustache, and his smile was the kind that never reached the eyes. Scout planted himself between Nora and the riders, hackles-up teeth bared in a continuous growl. The leader reined in. Dust settled around the horse's legs like smoke. "You'd be Nora Kane," he said. Not a question. Nora felt the old reflex stir, the way her shoulders settled, the way her right thumb brushed the hammer of the right-hand colt. She didn't draw. Not yet. "I would," she answered. Her voice came out level, almost bored. "And you're trespassing." A few of the men chuckled low and mean. The leader's smile didn't change. "Name's Colt Ramsey. These are my associates." The accent rolled strange off his tongue. Eastern, maybe farther, the kind of voice that had crossed oceans and still carried the chill of them. "We have business. Don't recall sending for any." "You misunderstand, Mrs. Kane." He leaned forward in the saddle, elbows on the horn. "We're not asking." Nora's gaze flicked across the faces behind him. Hard men, scars, missing teeth. The kind who followed money or fear, whichever paid better. She counted weapons, rifles across saddles, revolvers at hips, one scattergun. They were confident. Too confident. This land now belongs to the Silver Spur Land Company, Ramsey went on. We've bought up most of the basin, including your 400 acres. Nora felt something cold settle behind her breastbone. I got a deed filed proper in Santa Fe, she said. Paid in blood and sweat. Ain't sold a foot of it. Ramsey waved a gloved hand, dismissive. There are irregularities, legal problems. The specifics don't matter. What matters is this. He straightened. You have until noon tomorrow to clear out. Take your stock, your dog, whatever personal items you can carry. We'll even pay you $150 for your trouble. More than generous for a hard-scrabble place like this. One of the men, big scarred cheek shotgun across his pommel, snickered. Old girl, you deaf boss is being nice. Nora's jaw tightened. She could feel the pulse in her throat steady but faster than it should be. She thought of Caleb's grave up the hill. The small wooden cross she'd carved herself because the stonecutter in Bitter Creek charged too much. She thought of the spring creek that never ran dry the way the light hit the oak at dawn. She thought of nights when the silence had been so deep she could hear her own heartbeat and nothing else. She met Ramsey's eyes. Interesting, she said quietly. Because I don't do business with men who ride onto my property uninvited. The smile finally slipped just a fraction. His eyes went flat. You know who I am, he asked, softer now. Don't know, don't care. You should. He leaned forward again. I run things from here to the border. Cattle, claims, protection. I have 40 men, maybe 50. You're one woman alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. He let the words hang. Nora felt Rusty's scout press against her leg, trembling with the effort of holding back. She reached down slow and laid a hand on the dog's head. The fur was warm, coarse, alive. Tomorrow, Ramsey said. Noon. Be gone or be dead. Your choice. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind had died completely. Dust hung suspended in the air. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed thin and distant. Then Ramsey straightened, gestured to his men. They turned their horses in a slow, practiced wheel. Before he rode off, he looked back over his shoulder. Oh, and don't bother riding to the sheriff. He's understanding about our business interests. Very understanding. They loped away. Dust rose behind them, swallowed them. Nora stood until the last rider vanished over the ridge. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Scout whined once low in his throat and pressed harder against her leg. I know, boy, she murmured. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the tremor in him. Trouble's here. Real trouble. She looked toward the cabin. The Winchester waited above the door. Beyond it, the oak and the grave waited too. She started walking. The Colt nickered behind her, forgotten for now. The sun slipped lower, painting the grass the color of old blood. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped once sharp like a warning. Nora didn't look back. She stepped onto the porch, lifted the rifle from its pegs, checked the magazine. 15 rounds won in the chamber. She stood there a long time, listening to the quiet that had returned thicker now, heavier, the quiet of a thing waiting to break. Her thumb brushed the hammer of the Colt at her hip again. This time she didn't let go. The riders held their half-circle horses' shifting weight bits, jingling softly in the cooling air. Dust still hung like a thin veil, catching the dying slant of sun. Scout stood rigid at Nora's side, every muscle locked, a low rumble vibrating through his chest like distant thunder she could feel in her own ribs. Colt Ramsey sat easy in the saddle on that black stallion hat, tipped back just enough to show the hard line of his brow. Those ivory-handled Colts caught the last light flashing white against the black leather of his vest. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence post he's deciding whether to chop or leave standing. Name's Colt Ramsey, he said again, as if she might have missed it the first time. The accent rolled strange cold. These are my associates. One of the men, a thick-shouldered brute with a fresh scar curling across his cheek, spat tobacco juice into the dust. Big Red. Another chuckled low and private, like they shared a joke she wasn't in on. Hands rested near holsters, casual but ready. Nora felt her pulse kick up a notch, steady but insistent, like a drum someone had started beating inside her ribs. She swallowed once, tasting dust and the faint bitterness of the coffee she'd had at dawn. We've bought up most of the territory around Bitter Creek Basin, Ramsey continued, including this ranch, Silver Spur Land Company, legal and binding. She let the words settle. The wind picked up again, tugging at the loose strands of hair that had escaped her braid. Somewhere behind her, the chickens scratched in their pen, oblivious. The spring creek murmured faintly, the only sound that still felt like home. I got a deed filed proper in Santa Fe, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she meant, but steady. Paid in full with money I earned honest. I ain't sold nothing to nobody. Ramsey's smile returned thin as a knife edge. There are irregularities with your claim. Legal problems. The specifics don't matter. He spread his gloved hands, palms up, reasonable. What matters is this. You have until noon tomorrow to clear out. Take your horses, your cattle, your dog. We'll even pay you $150 for your trouble. More than generous for a place like this. Big Red laughed again, louder this time. Old girl, you deaf boss is being nice. Take the money and ride before what Nora cut in. The words came out soft, almost conversational, but they sliced the air clean. The laughter died. Ramsey's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Before you try to make me, she finished. Silence stretched. The horses blew softly, tails switching at flies. Scout's growl deepened, vibrating up her leg. Ramsey studied her a long moment, weighing something only he could see. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the saddle horn. You know who I am, Kane. Don't know. Don't care. You should. His voice dropped. I run things from here to the border. Cattle rustling, claim jumping, protection. I have 40 men, maybe 50. You're one woman alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. He let that sink in. Nora felt the truth of it settle like lead in her gut. No neighbor closer than Amos Reed's place, 8 miles east. No one to hear shots if they came. No one to find her body for days, maybe weeks. The isolation she'd chosen after hanging up the badge, the quiet she'd craved after Caleb, now felt like a noose slowly tightening. She glanced once toward the rise, toward the oak, and the small stone marker beneath it. Caleb's name carved shallow, already weathering. 3 years, and the grass still hadn't quite covered the raw earth she'd piled there herself. $150, enough to buy passage somewhere north. Maybe start over in a town where no one knew her name or her past. Enough to walk away from the grave she visited every Sunday with fresh wildflowers she picked along the creek. She looked back at Ramsey. I ain't leaving, she said. The words came out even, but her eyes flicked to Caleb's grave again, just for a heartbeat. Ramsey exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh without humor. You're a fool, Kane. A brave fool, but a fool nonetheless. Maybe, she said. But I'll be a free fool standing on my own land, which is more than you can say. Silence again, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the low moan of wind through the grass. Ramsey looked at her a long time. Really looked like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he spoke softer. I respect you, Mrs. Kane. In another life, we could have been allies. But I can't let you stand in my way. I have plans for this basin. Big plans. and you're a stone in the road that must be removed." Nora didn't blink. "I guess we understand each other." He nodded once slow. "Tomorrow, noon." He straightened in the saddle, gestured once. The riders turned as one wheeling their mounts in a practiced arc. Before he rode off, Ramsey looked back over his shoulder, eyes locking on hers. "This isn't over," he said quietly. They loped away. Dust rose in their wake, thick and choking, then settled slow. Nora stood rooted until the last rider crested the ridge and disappeared. Only then did she exhale a long, shaky breath she hadn't known she was holding. Scout pressed hard against her leg, whining once low and worried. She reached down, a fingers sinking into the thick fur behind his ears. He trembled under her hand. "Trouble's real now, boy," she whispered. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint scent of sage and gunpowder that wasn't there yet, but would be. She turned toward the cabin door. The Winchester felt heavier now, the weight of it pulling at her shoulder like a promise she hadn't wanted to make. Inside, the shadows were already long across the plank floor. She stepped over the threshold, letting the screen door slap shut behind her. Outside, the quiet returned, thicker, deeper waiting. She stood in the doorway a long moment, staring at the empty trail, the settling dust, the grave on the hill. Then she reached up, lifted the rifle from its pegs again, and began to check the loads one by one, slow like a woman, counting the hours until dawn. Far out on the flats, the first campfire flickered to life, small at first, then brighter. Laughter carried on the wind, coarse and careless. Another shot cracked into the sky, orange bloom against the darkening blue. They weren't leaving, and neither was she. Nora lowered the rifle barrel, rested it against the doorframe, and listened to the night settling in. Her hand stayed on the stock thumb, tracing the worn walnut, feeling the faint warmth still in the wood from the day's sun. She didn't move. Not yet. The last of the sun bled red across the western ridge as Nora rode into Bitter Creek. The town hadn't changed much in the years since she'd settled the ranch. Same false front buildings leaning against the wind. Same wide dirt street churned to powder by hooves and wagon wheels. Same faint stink of livery stable and wood smoke hanging in the cooling air. The saloon's piano tinkled faintly through open doors, a thin, half-hearted tune that died before it reached the edge of town. She rode slow, letting the sorrel mare pick her own pace. Scout trotted alongside, tongue lolling, but his ears stayed pricked forward, watchful. Nora kept one hand loose on the reins, the other resting near the butt of her right Colt. The belt felt heavier tonight, the leather warm against her hip from the day's heat. She tied up outside Amos Reed's general store. The sign above the door, faded gold letters on peeling black, still read simply, Reed's. No first name, no need. Everyone knew Amos. The bell above the door jangled when she pushed inside. The store smelled of coffee beans, tobacco axle grease, and the faint, musty sweetness of old flour sacks. A single oil lamp burned on the counter, throwing long shadows across the shelves. Amos stood behind the register, polishing a glass jar with a rag that had seen better decades. He looked up, saw her face, and the rag stopped moving. "Evening, Nora." Amos. She walked to the ammunition counter without preamble. The wooden bins were half-full brass, glinting dull in the lamplight. She pointed. 100 rounds of .45 Colt, 200 of .44 .40 for the Winchester. Amos's eyebrows climbed slow. He didn't move right away. Just looked at her, then at the door, then back. That's a lot of lead for a woman who says she only shoots snakes and coyotes. She met his eyes. Maybe the snakes got bigger. He exhaled through his nose, set the jar down, started filling the paper sacks, slow, deliberate. Each cartridge clinked like a small, cold promise. "You hear anything about strangers buying land around here?" she asked, voice low. Amos's hands paused. He glanced toward the front window where the last light was dying. "Heard some things. Like what? Like it's best not to ask questions about those particular strangers." He lowered his voice. "Nora, I've known you 5 years. You're a good woman. Whatever's coming, maybe you should think about riding out. Head north. Start fresh." The words landed soft, but they hit like a fist. She felt the pull of it, the open trail, a new town, no grave to tend, no memories to carry. For one heartbeat, she let herself imagine it. Then she thought of Caleb's stone under the oak, the way the morning light hit it, just so turning the carved letters gold for a minute before the sun climbed higher. She thought of the way the creek sounded at night, when everything else was quiet. She thought of Scout's head on her knee, while she sat on the porch watching stars come out. She couldn't leave that. "I appreciate the concern, Amos," she said quietly. "But I got Caleb buried on that land. I got a deed says it's mine. I don't run." Amos nodded once slow, like he'd expected the answer, but still hated hearing it. He reached under the counter, pulled out a small wooden box lid, warped from years in the dry air. Inside, a dozen sticks of dynamite fuses, coiled like pale snakes left over from when they'd blasted the new well last spring. "Might come in handy," he said. "No charge." She looked at the explosives a long moment. Then at him. His face was pale in the lamplight, and the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. "Much obliged." She paid for the ammunition coins, clinking heavy on the scarred wood, then tucked the dynamite box under her arm. Amos watched her the whole time, silent. At the door, she paused. "Amos." The man leading them, Colt Ramsey. "You know him?" Amos's jaw worked once, twice. Then he shook his head. "No. But I know his kind." She stepped out into the dusk. The air had cooled fast. Goose flesh rose on her arms under the cotton shirt. Scout waited by the horsetail low, but wagging once when he saw her. She untied the sorrel, swung up, settled the box behind the cantle. As she turned the mare, she caught sight of the bulletin board nailed to the post outside the store. A fresh sheet of paper had been tacked up, crude hand-lettering edges curling already in the dry heat. Land claim transfer, Nora Kane property, Bitter Creek Basin. Sold to Silver Spur Land Company. Her name was underlined in red ink twice, like an accusation. She stared at it a long moment. A few townsfolk passing by glanced her way, then looked quickly elsewhere, murmuring low. One woman crossed the street rather than walk past her. Nora's throat tightened. She felt the weight of eyes on her back, not hostile yet, but wary. She was no longer just the quiet widow on the edge of town. She was trouble. On the ride back, the trail was a pale ribbon in the dark. Stars began to prick the sky, cold and distant. The moon wasn't up yet. Halfway home, she saw them. Faint orange glows scattered across the flats to the east, maybe 3 miles out now. Campfires. More than one. Too many for 7 men. Her stomach twisted. She reined in for a moment, letting the sorrel blow. Scout stopped beside her ears, up nose testing the wind. The fires flickered like eyes watching back. Nora leaned down, rested her hand on Scout's head. His fur was warm, coarse, alive. "They're closer, boy," she whispered. "And they won't ask twice." The wind picked up, then cold and dry, carrying the faint scent of pine smoke from those distant fires. It tugged at her hat brim, rustled the grass along the trail, whispered past the rise where the oaks stood dark against the stars. She straightened in the saddle, touched the colt at her hip, once then nudged the mare forward. The ranch waited ahead, dark silhouette of cabin and barn, and the small corral fence, the spring creek, murmuring soft and steady. And on the hill, under the oak, the grave waited too. Nora rode on into the night, the dynamite box bumping gently against her back, the weight of tomorrow pressing heavier with every step the horse took. Somewhere far off, a coyote lifted its voice, a single drawn-out note that hung on the wind and didn't fade for a long time. Behind her, faint but unmistakable, came the slow clop of another horse keeping distance, not closing, just following. Watching, they knew she'd bought lead, and now the whole basin would know she wasn't running. Nora didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the dark shape of the ranch ahead, fingers tightening on the reins until the leather creaked. The night pressed closer. Dawn came gray and grudging, a thin line bleeding up from the east. The air still carried the night's chill, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Nora woke if she'd slept at all on the porch bench, Winchester across her lap neck, stiff eyes gritty from staring into the dark. Scout stirred beside her, stretched, then stood with a low whine nose testing the wind. She rose joints popping like dry twigs. The coffee pot from last night sat cold on the steps. She didn't bother reheating it. No time for comfort now. The ranch looked the same in first-light cabin logs, weathered silver barn roof sagging just a hair more than yesterday. The oak on the rise standing quiet sentinel over Caleb's grave. But everything felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. She started with the trail leading in from the east, the one Colt Ramsey and his men had ridden twice already. Shovel in hand, she walked the fence line, picking spots where the ground looked soft enough to give, but hard enough not to collapse too soon. The first pit she dug was shallow, knee-deep, just wide enough for a horse's foreleg to drop through. She lined the bottom with sharpened stakes, cut from old fence posts the night before, and covered it with thin branches and a dusting of dirt. The work was slow, deliberate, each scoop of earth heavier than the last. Halfway through the third pit, her shovel struck rock. The blade jarred up her arms, teeth rattling. She cursed under her breath, pried the stone free, felt the edge catch her palm. A thin line of red welled up bright against the dirt on her skin. Blood dripped once, twice, darkening the soil. She stared at it a moment, small, stupid wound, and wiped her hand on her pants. The sting was sharp, real first blood she'd drawn in preparation, not in the fight itself. It felt like a promise of worse to come. Scout lay nearby, head up, watching her with those steady eyes. He didn't whine, didn't pace, just watched. Nora kept going. By mid-morning, she'd strung wire between fence posts at neck height for a mounted man thin, almost invisible in the slanting light. Taut enough to cut deep if taken at speed. She tested it once with her forearm. The wire bit skin left a white line that turned pink. Good enough. The dynamite came next. She carried the sticks to the wood pile behind the cabin, dug shallow holes beneath the stacked logs, packed each charge with a handful of old horseshoe nails from the barn. Fuses, long enough, she could light them from the porch or loft if she had to. She buried 2 more near the corral gate where horses would mill if things went bad. The smell of black powder clung to her fingers, acrid and familiar. Too familiar. She paused once halfway to the barn and walked up the rise instead. The oak's shade was cool, almost kind. Caleb's headstone was plain limestone name and dates carved shallow. Dust had settled in the letters overnight. She knelt, brushed it away with her thumbs, slow and careful, like she was afraid to wake him. The stone was cool under her palm. "I won't let them take you from me again, Caleb," she whispered to the quiet. "I won't." No answer, just wine moving through the grass, rustling the leaves above her head. Back at the woodpile, she straightened, wiped sweat from her brow with a sleeve already streaked with dirt and blood. Scout followed close ears flicking at every sound. Then she herded hooves, not many, just one. Steady, deliberate, coming down the trail. A lone rider appeared at the fence line, Slim Tate, the lanky kid with the patched vest. He reined in 50 yards out, pulled a pistol, fired 3 times into the air. Crack, crack, crack. The reports rolled across the flats, sharp and mocking. Trua ne la hun chot ba Kane, he shouted, voice cracking on the high notes. Don't make us burn it clean. Behind him, 500 yards off, a pile of dry grass and brush smoldered black smoke curling up in a thin pillar warning fire. Slim laughed once, high and nervous, then spun his horse and galloped back the way he'd come. Nora stood frozen, shovel still in hand, heart slamming, ribs so hard she tasted it in her throat. Scout surged forward, barking deep and furious, hackles up. She dropped the shovel, walked to the porch, picked up the Winchester. The stock felt warm from the sun, heavy with promise. She levered around into the chamber brass, glinting once in the light, then raised the barrel skyward. One shot. Clean, flat crack that echoed long across the basin. The sound rolled out, swallowed by distance, but it carried a warning of her own. Scout stopped barking, looked up at her, tail low. Nora lowered the rifle barrel, still smoking faintly. Her hands shook just a little, but she didn't try to hide it. She turned back to the woodpile, knelt, and began tamping dirt over the first buried stick of dynamite. Her cut palm throbbed with every press, fresh blood mixing with soil. Scout patted close, nosed her wounded hand gently, tongue rough and warm against the cut. She let him lick it once, twice, warmth of him, the only soft thing left in the morning. She scratched behind his ears, voice low. Last quiet we get, boy. Then she stood. From the east, the smoke from their warning fire still rose thin and black against the climbing sun. Closer now. She glanced once more at the grave under the oak Caleb stone, catching the first real light of day. Then she walked toward the barn, Winchester in one hand, the shovel in the other. Behind her, Scout followed, silent now, ears up. In the loft door, high above, a shadow flickered just for a heartbeat, then vanished. Nora didn't see it, but Scout did. His growl started low, building, slow rumbling through the still air like the first warning of thunder. The day was only beginning. The night pressed down on the ranch like a wool blanket soaked in cold sweat. Stars wheeled overhead, sharp and indifferent, while the creek out back murmured its endless, pointless song. Nora sat on the porch steps, the wooden cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. Bitter sludge now tasting of grounds and regret. The lantern from inside the cabin threw a weak yellow pool across the yard, flickering shadows that danced like ghosts over the corral fence and the chicken coop. Scout lay at her feet, head up, eyes fixed on the dark, a low growl rumbling constant in his throat. She'd unsaddled the sorrel hours ago, rubbed her down proper, fed the stock. Routine, the kind that kept the days from swallowing her whole since Caleb went. But tonight, it felt hollow, like patching a roof in a thunderstorm. The dynamite box from Amos sat open beside her, sticks nestled in straw fuses, coiled long and yellow in the lamplight. She picked one up, ran her thumb along its length, feeling the rough twist of cord. Powder inside smelled sharp, like the inside of a storm cloud. From the east, 2 miles out now, maybe less, came the sounds. Faint at first, then clearer on the wind. Horses' nickering bits, clinking men's voices raised in harsh laughter that carried like coyote calls. Ramsey's raiders camped bold as brass, fires winking through the scrub like wolf eyes in the brush. Scout's growl deepened, hackles twitching. Nora reached down, free hand on his neck. His muscles were taut wire under the fur. She wanted to believe it was bluff. Men like Ramsey talked big. Rode off found easier pickings. Bitter Creek Basin was full of broken claims and spineless folks. Why bleed for 400 acres of dry grass and a creek that barely held water in August? She could pack at dawn, load the mule with what mattered, Caleb's old saddle scout, a few keepsakes, and head north like Amos said. Start over where no one knew her as the ranger who tracked Comanche ghosts across the Llano and pulled her peacemakers faster than a rattler struck. But the grave pulled at her. Up the rise the oak loomed black. Caleb's marker, a pale smudge beneath it. She'd buried him herself, hands raw from the frozen ground that winter. Fever still hot in her veins from nursing him. If I go, she whispered to the night eyes on the dark shape of the headstone, they'll erase every trace of you, Caleb. The words hung unanswered, swallowed by the wind, whispering through the grass. Her eyes burned. Dust from the ride or the weight of wakefulness settling in. Fingers ached where they gripped the Winchester across her lap, knuckles whitening on the forestock. She'd been up since before first light, same as always. But this was different. No dawn coffee would chase this tired away. The isolation she'd chosen after hanging up the badge, 8 years of badges stained with blood, and Comanche dust now clawed back. No backup, no whistle to call rangers. Just her, the ranch, and whatever hell Ramsey brought at noon. Sit and wait. Hope the dark kept them off till morning. Let the bluff play out, or start now. Dig pits along the trail, string wire at throat height. Pack those dynamite sticks with nails like Amos hinted at. One wrong shovel scrape, one spark in the wrong wind, and they'd come running early. But waiting felt like handing them the deed already. The laughter swelled again, closer now. A snatch of words on the breeze, that old bitch'll fold come sun up. A bottle shattered somewhere out there. Glass tinkling sharp. Scout surged to his feet, barking once deep and warning. Nora froze, listened. Hooves, not distant camp noise. Real thudding, steady. 3, maybe 4 riders skirting the edge of her land. Shadows detached from the black, silhouetted against the faint campfire glow miles off. They whooped low, one firing a pistol into the air. Crack, 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 muzzle flash, orange blooms that lit scarred faces for split seconds. Testing, probing, seeing if she'd bite. Her heart slammed ribs. Old fear uncoiling from the pit of her stomach, the same knot from nights tracking raiders in moonlight. Breath fogged white, knowing one shadow might end it all. She doused the lantern with a quick pinch, glass chimney clinking, soft smoke wisped up. Acrid dropped flat behind the porch railing, thick logs between her and the night. Winchester cycled quiet chamber round ready. Scout flattened beside her, silent now, eyes gleaming. The riders paced the fence line 50 yards out, horses snorting dust. Another shot, higher this time. Bullet whistling harmless over the barn roof, thunking into corral wood. Splinters flew unseen. They laughed, spurred past, vanishing into scrub without a full charge. Message delivered. They're testing me. She breathed pulse thundering in her ears. The yard fell silent again, save Scout's panning and the creek's murmur. Stars stared down, cold witnesses. The dynamite box waited fuses, pale in the dark. Her hands shook loose, the Winchester's grip joints protesting. Dawn was hours off, noon closer. A soft thud, boots on dirt, came from the trail. Not riders now. A smaller shape stumbling, breathing hard. A boy, maybe 12, face streaked with dirt and fear, clutching a folded note. He stopped at the porch steps, voice cracking. Mr. Reed sent me. Said they come to the store after you left. Hid him some. Said if he helps you again, they burn it down. Nora rose, slow Winchester low, but ready. The boy's left eye was swelling shut, lip split. His hand shook as he held out the note, Amos's scrawl. They know I gave you powder. Eyes on me now. Be careful, Nora. She took it, folded it into her vest. You hurt bad. The boy shook his head, but tears cut tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. They said, tell you. Town don't want trouble. Said you're bringing it? Nora's throat closed. She knelt level with him. Go home, son. Tell Amos I'm sorry. And thank him. The boy nodded, once turned, and ran back into the dark. Nora stayed kneeling a moment, note burning against her chest. Amos's eye, the boy's split lip, the town's whispers. All because she wouldn't run. She looked toward the rise. The oak stood sentinel. Caleb's stone in the empty ground beside it waited. She rose, walked to the corral gate. Shovel again. Dug shallow under the posts, buried 2 more sticks, packed nails tight. Then strung the last wire throat-high, taut as piano string. Scout watched, trembling now every time a distant shot cracked. She finished, wiped her hands on her pants, blood and dirt and powder smearing together. The fires out there burned steady mocking. The laughter started again, fainter now, but no less sure. She sat back on the porch, shotgun across her knees, Winchester beside her. Scout pressed close, head on her thigh. She laid a hand on his neck, felt the rapid beat of his heart. Then a single crack from the darkness beyond the fence. Not skyward this time. Scout yelped high, sharp, surprised. His body jerked, legs buckling. He hit the porch boards hard, skidding on wood blood, blooming dark across his gray fur, spreading fast over his ribs. Nora lunged. Scout! She slid to her knees, hands pressing the wound. Warm blood soaked her fingers, her jeans. Scout's eyes, wide confused, found hers. His tail thumped, once weak. Tongue lolled, licked her hand slow, trusting the way he always did when she came home tired. Then he sighed a small final sound and went still. Nora stared. The gunfire outside seemed distant now, muffled by the ringing in her ears. Smoke drifted through the night air, stinging her eyes until they watered. Or maybe it wasn't the smoke. No, she whispered, voice cracking. Not you too. She cradled his head a moment longer, fingers buried in the fur behind his ears. Then she laid him down, gentle on the boards. The fires burned brighter on the flats, closer. She stood slow, knees protesting the hard wood. Winchester in one hand, blood-slick fingers tightening on the stock. The night watched, waited. From the east, another faint laugh carried on the wind, like the promise of more to come. Dawn came slow and grudging, a thin gray line bleeding up from the east. The air still carried the night's chill sharp enough to sting the lungs. Nora knelt in the soft earth beneath the oak hands, raw and crusted with Scout's blood. The grave was shallow, dug in haste with the same shovel she'd used for the traps, but deep enough. She had carried him down the rise in her arms, his body heavier than it had ever been in life, limp and cooling. She laid him down, gentle, arranged his paws, the way he always slept, curled close, head on her knee. Then she pushed the dirt back over him, patting it smooth with trembling palms. No marker, no time. Just loose soil, dark and damp with his blood. She stayed on her knees between the 2 graves, now Caleb's weathered stone on one side, Scout's fresh mound on the other. Her fingers traced the carved letters of Caleb's name, then rested on the bare earth over Scout. Blood from her palms smeared faint red across both. I won't let them touch either of you, she whispered. The words came out hoarse, cracked. Not while I've got breath. No wind answered. Just the soft rustle of oak leaves overhead, indifferent. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hot, but dry. She hadn't cried, not yet. Tears would come later, maybe, if there was a later. Right now there was only the dull burn in her chest and the hollow where Scout's warmth used to be. She had lost things before, friends on the Llano men she'd ridden with, pieces of herself every time she pulled a trigger, but this was different. This was home. This was the last quiet thing she had left. She stood slow joints, stiff knees, protesting the hard ground. The Winchester leaned against the oak trunk where she'd set it. She picked it up, checked the loads by feel brass, cool and familiar under her fingers, then slung it over her shoulder. From the flats to the east came a low rumble. Not thunder, hooves, many of them. Dust boiled up in a yellow cloud, thick and choking even at this distance. Nearly 50 riders now. Ramsey had called in more during the night. Their line spread wide across the basin, dark shapes against the climbing light. A voice carried on the wind, Ramsey's raw and furious. Today it ends Kane. She saw Crow riding near the front, dark braid, swinging face painted with soot and a thin, knowing smile. He had watched her bury Scout from the shadows last night. He knew she was bleeding inside. Nora's stomach twisted, but the fear wasn't sharp anymore. It had dulled to something colder, steadier. She wasn't the woman who'd hung up her badge anymore. That woman had died with Scout on the porch boards. What was left was the ranger she'd tried to bury, the one who'd tracked killers across moonless plains, who'd learned that mercy was a luxury and hesitation was death. She hated it. Hated the way her hands remembered the weight of a gun, too well hated the calm that settled in her veins like ice water. But she needed it now. She walked to the barn, boots dragging through churned dirt. Climbed the ladder to the loft, one painful rung at a time, her cut palm stinging fresh with every grip. Up top, the Sharps .50 waited against a hay bale wrapped in oiled cloth. She unwrapped it, slow-checked the nipple, loaded a single heavy cartridge. Set it on the edge of the loft door with a clear field down the trail. From here she could see the whole approach, every dip, every rise. The Winchester stayed slung across her back. The Colts hung low on her hips, loaded and waiting. She knelt behind the hay cheek against the cold steel of the Sharps, breathing slow. The fires from last night had gone out. No more laughter, no more banjo. Just the steady thunder of hooves growing louder, dust rising like smoke from a grass fire. They were coming for real now. Nora glanced once more toward the graves. The oak's shadow fell long across both mounds in the slanting light. Caleb's stone caught a glint of sun. Scout's fresh earth still looked raw, unnatural. She swallowed once, tasting dust and copper. No clean victory waited at the end of this. Only blood, hers, theirs, maybe both. But if she ran now, if she slipped away in the dark, like so many others had, the graves would be dug up. The markers broken, the names erased. Everything that made her Nora Kane, widow ranger woman who'd stood her ground, would be gone. She wouldn't let that happen. She chambered the round in the Sharps with a soft, metallic click. The sound was final, like a door closing. The rumble of hooves swelled to a roar. Dust boiled higher, swallowing the horizon. Dark shapes resolved into men and horses, Ramsey at the center on his black stallion coat, flapping face set hard. They poured into the yard like a dark tide. Nora exhaled, slow finger resting light on the trigger. Her heart beat calm, now slow, even like it had years ago on scout trails when the only thing between her and death was a steady hand and one good shot. She sighted down the long barrel. No words left to say. Just the waiting. And the thunder coming closer. The loft shook with the thunder of hooves below. Nora knelt behind the hay bale Sharps, steady on the edge cheek, pressed to the stock. The first wave of Colt Ramsey's raiders poured into the yard like a dark tide. Nearly 50 men, dust boiling under iron shoes, rifles spitting fire. Ramsey rode at the front, black coat, whipping face set in grim purpose. His voice cut through the roar. Take her alive if you can, but dead works too. Bullets hammered the barn walls, splintering wood, punching through slats inches from her head. She exhaled slow, found a target, a rider swinging wide toward the rise, and squeezed. The sharps boomed, heavy recoil jarring her wounded shoulder. The man jerked backward, horse bolting riderless. She worked the underlever, chambered another round, fired again. A second rider spun from the saddle, clutching his chest. The air thickened with smoke-black powder burning hay, the sour stink of horse sweat. She couldn't stay here. They were closing, flanking torches already flaring in hands. The loft was high ground, but it was becoming a trap. She slung the sharps across her back, grabbed the Winchester, and dropped down the ladder. Her thighs screamed with every rung, fresh blood soaking the bandage on her hip, but she hit the floor running. Scout's grave flashed in her mind, Caleb's stone beside it, and the thought steadied her. This wasn't about living anymore. It was about not letting them touch what was left. She burst out the barn door low and fast, sprinting for the cabin. Bullets chased her, whining past, kicking dirt at her heels. One grazed her hip, a hot line of fire, tearing cloth and skin. She staggered, caught herself on the porch rail, blood warming down her side, didn't stop, dove through the doorway, slammed the heavy oak shut, dropped the bar. Inside the cabin was dim sunlight, slanting through bullet holes like thin spears. She reloaded the Winchester with shaking fingers, brass clicking into place. Outside the yard was madness, horses, rearing men, shouting, torches arcing toward the cabin walls. Ramsey's voice rose again. Burn it. Burn her out. Nora moved to the front window, broken glass crunching under her boots. She fired through the gap. Lever, fire, lever, fire. Methodical. Each shot counted. A man trying to torch the door dropped, clutching his throat. Another fell from his saddle horse, bolting. Then an arrow hissed through the window, long fletched with hawk feathers, burying itself in the far wall inches from her head. The shaft quivered, black obsidian head, glinting. Crow. She ducked instinctively, heart slamming. No time to think. She grabbed the last 2 sticks of dynamite from the table. Fuses already cut. Lit them with a lucifer struck on her boot heel. The fuses hissed, spitting sparks. She hurled both out the window toward the knot of men crowding the yard, straight into the press of horses and torches. The explosions came together, 2 deep, earth-shaking booms. Dirt and wood and metal scraps erupted in vicious clouds. Men screamed. Horses screamed louder, stampeding in blind panic. Smoke rolled thick, choking, stinging her eyes, until tears ran. Nora dropped behind the table, drew both Colts. The cabin walls shuddered as men tried the door axes, biting wood, heavy thuds. She fired through the door. 2 quick shots, reports blending into one. The chopping stopped. A body slumped against the outside planks. She crawled to the side window. 2 men climbing the porch, pistols raised. She leaned out, both Colts bucking in her hands. One spun and fell. The other clutched his chest and tumbled backward. The cabin was surrounded now. Bullets punched through the logs, whining, splintering, filling the room with flying wood chips and the sharp stink of lead. She reloaded the Colts with the last rounds from her belt hands, steady despite the blood slicking her fingers. Her hip bled steadily, soaking her pants, pooling on the floorboards. Ammunition was gone, except for what was in the guns. 6 shots left, maybe. She thought of Caleb, his quiet laugh on summer evenings, the way he'd rest his hand on her shoulder when the nights got long. Thought of Scout's trusting eyes, the way he'd always pressed close when the nights turned cold. Those memories weren't just hers anymore. They were the last things worth dying for. The door shuddered again, louder, closer to giving. Splinters rained down her neck. She raised the right Colt, thumbed back the hammer with a soft click. Then, new sound. Gunfire from the west. Not scattered, organized, volley fire. Sharp, disciplined cracks to different rifles, different rhythm. Nora crawled to the front window, peered through the bullet-riddled shutters. Riders poured over the ridge, 20 or more badges glinting in the morning light, rifles shouldered in tight formation. Texas Rangers. Leading them was Wyatt Cole, hat gone, face streaked with sweat and dust, waving his arm high and shouting her name. "Nora, hold on." The volley came down like judgment. Men tumbled from saddles, horses rearing the line, breaking in confusion. Ramsey wheeled his black stallion face, pale under the soot eyes, wide with sudden calculation. Nora stared, breath caught in her throat. The cabin still shuddered with stray shots, but the pressure eased. The axes went quiet. She pushed off the wall legs, shaking vision swimming, but forced herself upright. Raised the right Colt. Last 2 rounds. Ramsey was turning now, spurring the stallion toward the flat's coat, flapping, trying to break free. She stepped to the doorway, leaned against the frame. The yard was smoke and bodies and panicked horses. She lifted the Colt, sighted down the barrel, one-handed arm, trembling 200 yards, moving target. Impossible. She exhaled slow, like she'd done 1,000 times on scout trails years ago, and squeezed. The Colt bucked. The report cracked sharp. Ramsey jerked in the saddle, swayed, then pitched sideways. His boot caught in the stirrup for a heartbeat before he fell free. He hit the dirt hard, rolled once, and lay still. A ragged cheer went up from the ranger's short fierce. Nora's arm dropped. The revolver slipped from numb fingers, clattered to the floorboards. Her knees buckled. She slid down the door frame, back against the splintered wood. Legs splayed. Blood spread beneath her in a slow, dark pool. The room tilted again, shadows creeping in at the edges. She looked toward the rise. Caleb's stone and Scout's mound just visible through the haze. The oak leaves stirred in the wind, soft and indifferent. Wyatt's voice cut through the smoke, urgent. Nora, she closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. When she opened them again, the yard was still burning, still smoking, but the shooting had stopped. She sat there, bleeding, breathing shallow, watching the light play across the graves on the hill. The fight was over. But the quiet that followed felt heavier than any bullet. The summer of 1885 came gentle to Bitter Creek Basin, the kind of heat that settled slow rather than struck. The new cabin stood solid where the old one had burned logs, cut fresh by neighbors who'd ridden in with axes and hammers the week after the fight. The porch boards were plain and smooth, the roof tight against rain. Nora sat in the rocking chair she'd built herself from oak scraps, the wood still pale and smelling faintly of sap. Her hair had gone mostly silver, pulled back in a loose braid that caught the late sun. She moved slower now, left leg stiff from hip to knee, a limp that announced itself with every step across the yard. Mornings were the worst. Joints aching like old wounds waking up. But she never complained. She just waited for the coffee to boil and the stiffness to loosen. Sage, the blue heeler pup she'd taken in last spring, lay curled at her feet, ears twitching at flies. The dog was young, eager, nothing like Scout, but loyal in his own way. He'd taken to sleeping on the porch at night, head on her boot. The yard had healed some. The corral rails stood straight again, painted black where fire had scarred them. The chicken coop was rebuilt, hens scratching in fresh dirt. Up the rise under the oak, 3 stones waited. Caleb's marker, plain limestone, name and dates carved shallow. Scout's low mound earth, long settled now. and Levi Shaw's simple slab young ranger who'd taken a bullet in the final rush asked to be buried here if it came to that. Said brave men ought to rest together. The stonecutter from town had done the work, clean refused payment. Wyatt Cole sat in the other chair boots, propped on the rail, passing the whiskey bottle between them. The label was worn to nothing. It didn't matter. Sage lifted his head when Wyatt shifted, then laid it down again with a soft sigh. Wyatt took a pull, passed it over. Nora accepted it, fingers brushing his. The whiskey burned familiar down her throat, cutting through the dust in her mouth. They sat in the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. The wind moved soft through the grass, carrying the scent of dry sage and distant rain that never quite arrived. Somewhere out on the flats, a cow lowed once answered by another. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Wyatt cleared his throat after a while. Silver Spur's gone for good, he said. Last of the papers came through last month. Syndicate's assets seized, deeds reaffirmed. Most of Ramsey's boys swung or got long stretches in Huntsville. Even Tate's out. New sheriff's a ranger man. Nora nodded once. The news had reached her weeks ago, carried by riders who stopped by to pay respects or drop off supplies. She'd listened, thanked them, watched them ride off. It changed nothing in the yard. The graves stayed where they were. She took another sip, handed the bottle back. Wyatt watched her a moment, then asked, quiet, "Any regrets?" The question hung there, simple and heavy. Nora looked past the porch rail, past the yard to the rise. The oak leaves stirred in the breeze shadows, shifting over the stones. She thought of Scout's last lick against her palm. Caleb's hand in hers the night before. The fever took him for good. The weight of the sharps in her hands that dawn. The way blood had pooled under her when the fight ended. She thought of the limp that woke her every cold morning. The way her left arm still ached when rain was coming. The nights she woke tasting powder and hearing hooves that weren't there anymore. She met Wyatt's eyes. "No regrets," she said. Her voice was rough, low, but steady. "A woman's got to stand for something." Wyatt nodded, slow throat working. He didn't push. Didn't need to. Sage stirred, lifted his head, laid it gently across the toe of her boot. Tail thumped once against the boards, then settled again. Not Scout, never Scout, but enough to fill the quiet places just a little. Wyatt stood after a while, joints popping. He set the bottle on the rail, hat in hand. "I'll ride out at first light," he said. "Check the north fence. You need anything, you holler." Nora nodded. "Much obliged, Wyatt." He hesitated at the steps, looked back once. His eyes were red-rimmed again, but he didn't speak. Just touched the brim of his hat and walked to his horse. Nora stayed where she was. The bottle sat untouched now, whiskey catching the last of the light. Sage sighed content. Night came slow. Stars pricked the sky, one by one, cold and distant over the Texas prairie. The wind rose, gentle whispering through the grass, rustling the oak leaves on the rise. Somewhere far off, a coyote lifted its voice, a single drawn-out note that hung on the air and didn't fade for a long time. Nora sat motionless in the rocking chair. Hands folded in her lap, eyes on the graves she couldn't see anymore in the dark. The bottle stayed where it was. Wyatt's horse nickered once as he rode away, hoofbeats fading into the night. The quiet returned, deep unbroken. She didn't move. Not yet. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.